Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start our conference. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the third International Academic Conference, Energy Justice and Energy Transition, Global Europe States, here in Katowice at the Scientific Information Center and Academia Library. This conference has already become a regular event in the calendar of many researchers from around the world. We are very happy to see that some of our experts have been coming to Katowice for 3 years in a row. We are truly honored by our presence. Now I'm pleased to welcome Professor Maciej Nowak, Vice Rector of the University of Economics in Katowice. Professor Marzena Czarnecka, Head of Department of Energy Transition of our university. Mr. Sławomir Korman, member of the... Stanisław. Stanisław Korman, member of the board of the Amper Silesia and Zagłębie Metropolis. The conference will organized by the University of Economics, by Department of Energy Transition at the University of Economics in Katowice, headed by Professor Marzena Czarnecka, in cooperation with Abu Dhabi University, represented by Professor Rafael Heffron. Welcome, Professor. Professor is chairman of Program Council of our conference. Department prepared this conference with cooperation also University of Pavia Faculty of Political and Science and Social Science. I'm pleased to invite Professor Maciej Nowak, Professor Marzena Czarnecka, and Mr. Stanisław Korman to give the opening statements. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I am really honored to welcome you to the University of Economics in Katowice for the third International Academic Conference, Energy Justice and Energy Transition. The rector of our university, Professor Celina Olszak, who unfortunately is not able to join us today, asked me to convey her best wishes for a good conference and the warmest regards. Dear guests, thank you very much for accepting the invitation to visit our university and to attend this, I hope, very interesting and important scientific event. As we all know, the energy transition is undoubtedly one of the greatest challenges we face worldwide, in Europe, in Poland, and especially in Upper Silesia. As you probably know, Katowice is the capital of a region which for more than 200 years have been and still is one of the biggest industry regions in Europe. For a long time, heavy industry, coal mining and coal-based energy was the main source of prosperity of the region and its inhabitants. So it seems that Upper Silesia, that Katowice, and especially our university, is the best place to conduct the discussion on topics which are included in the conference program. As a representative of the university authorities, I would express our satisfaction that it was possible to bring together such a distinguished group of people conducting research on energy justice and energy transition. Thank you once more for attending this conference, and at this point I would like to thank Professor Marzena Czarnecka and the whole team for organizing this very interesting, I hope, event. As I noticed, the program of the conference is quite very tight, so I will not extend my speech. I just would like to wish you a successful conference, interesting presentations, and first of all, fruitful and inspiring discussions here at this hall and during coffee breaks and lunch breaks as well. And if there is enough time, of course, pleasant time spent in the city of Katowice, which is more and more nice, I hope. So, dear colleagues, thank you very much, and I wish you again good conference. Thank you very much.
Professor Marzena Czarnecka, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, firstly, dear students, I'm so happy that the class is full of the young people, because I am too old. Mr. Marcin is a little bit younger, a little bit. And so we are so happy that we can just tell you how the energy transition is following exactly here in Katowice. Katowice is the special region. It is it is deep in my heart because of the, let's say, the changes which are here. And we are usually saying in Warsaw and in whole Poland, when something is starting, it's starting here in the, let's say, heart of Poland. And the heart of Poland is not Warsaw, as the former king said, it is the Katowice. The question is why? Because we are here in the middle of the transformation, and the question is how to produce energy, how to distribute energy, and how to do it with the point of the energy justice. The energy justice is something which is more than important in the whole, let's say, transition. And here during the conference, we are starting and we are trying to answer some questions. The first one is who gains? The second one is who pays? And the third is who decides? And I would like to say it is the, let's say, the government and the regulation, and it will be something which is, of course, just typical and crucial. But the answer is also us and society, and the question is, of course, and we're supposed to, let's say, answer the question and, let's say, make some propositions, not only for us, for academics, but also for the government, for the university, and for all of us. So I wish you all the best, fruitful, let's say, decisions and a fruitful discussion during the conference. But I have to say you that today we have November, the 4th or the 5th, the 6th of November, and the weather is absolutely perfect. And I do recommend you just to make a small walk nearby in Katowice, because I remember when I was the student, long time ago, and when I was coming here from the other, let's say, city in Silesia, my mom told me, that is the horrible place, really. There is absolutely nothing here. It is full of ugly buildings. And right now, when you make the walk, it is one of the best cities in Poland, and it is the majority of the forest which is around the city, the full of, let's say, trees, is here in Katowice. So I do recommend you to have a long walk during the breaks, and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now I invite Mr. Stanisław Korman. I invite you, the floor is yours.
Esteemed professors, dear participants, young people students. First of all, I would like to explain about my name. Sławomir is a beautiful name. In family, it's a tradition to first son got the name Stanisław. It's a five generation in the row. So you know me. Stanisław is the name in my heart, in my family. You know everything about energy justice and energy transition, but you may not know about metropoly. What is a metropoly? First of all, the name of the metropoly, Górnośląsko-Zagłębiowska Metropolia. It's a very difficult name to pronounce to the Poles and to the foreign people. It's impossible to, in my opinion, to say. So I will use a short name, just metropoly. Our metropoly is the only metropoly in whole Poland as an institution. We got a lot of metropolitan areas here in Poland, but institutional, we are the only one metropoly in whole Poland. We are a union of 41 local government units, more than 2,500 square kilometers and more than 2 million inhabitants. The main tasks of metropolis are transport organization, social economic development, promotion, and special management. We also help universities and young students in our region. So I wish you inspiring debates and fruitful conversation, as well as a pleasant stay in our metropolis. Thank you. All the best for you.
Thank you very much for opening this conference. Now we will have to listen the distinguished keynote address delivery by Professor Rafael Heffron from Abu Dhabi University.
So thank you very much for the invitation by the organizing committee. And also, it's very good to be back here for the third conference, having been here for the first two. And it's also good to see some familiar faces who've been coming, as Marcin said, for 3 years and supporting this event, which I think is growing to be one of the bigger events on energy transition and energy justice in the EU and also internationally. And that's why our university, Abu Dhabi University, has partnered up this year. It's been a pleasure to be a partner this year. And the University of Abu Dhabi is in the top 250 in the world rankings, 75th for research output. So these are things that we want to work together over the next few years. But in terms of my presentation today, I think echoing some of the comments made already, it is looking at the energy transition. It is looking at how we can utilize new tools to deliver that energy transition in a just way. But when we think of where we are in the EU, and I'll be talking today about EU energy policy being at a crossroads. And you can probably tell from my accent that I am originally from the EU, from Ireland, where people say I think they say it's the sexiest accent in the EU. But So just to give a brief background, I won't spend too long talking about myself, but I did just want to say that I have a range of different EU experience, but also global and international experience. So what I'm saying in the context, when we think of the EU being at a crossroads, we think there are both internal problems we need to reflect on within the EU, but also external problems with the EU. And I'll come to some of those later. So the first point I want to make is that climate change is happening, and climate change is racing away from us currently. You can think, when you read the papers today, there's always somewhere in the world is suffering some type of, let's say, climate-related problems. And we can see this is costing more and more money. So, just some quick diagrams. You can see, obviously, a classic image of the polar bear. And also that some of the issues around, led by the UN, talking about it as a climate emergency, but also we are now getting new categorizations of what is, let's say, environmental damage. And here again, you can get many different reports which talk about the cost of inaction, the cost if we do nothing. That's why when we think of EU energy policy at a crossroads, if we continue to be at that crossroads, it's going to cost more and more money. The actual cheaper solution shown in research today, in economics research today, is if we act on climate change, it'll be less costly than if we do not act. And considering we are at a university where economics is, part of the key mission of the university, to me that is significant. So what we need to think about, and I think actually it has been said in essence earlier on, when we think of the challenge of the energy transition, or more specifically EU energy law, climate change is happening. Most people agree with that unless you're living in America. But, we think if we do nothing, how much it'll cost, and then who will pay is the big question. So in Europe, we have a recent example of who will pay. We remember back a couple of years ago in terms of COVID-19 crisis, also the Russia-Ukraine crisis had just started. Who paid? The energy prices went up. The consumer paid. The companies, international energy companies, were making what economists would refer to as supernormal profits for several years. While we were being told, it was because of these COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Not really when you're earning supernormal profits. So again, we're thinking about that perspective of who will change or who will pay. But I just wanted to highlight for some of the researchers in the room, this is part of ongoing work for me. And when we're approaching this work from a more legal and policy perspective, we're thinking this is some conceptual work, but also linked with comparative law and public law analysis. Public law, we're comparing the different institutions and how they are performing in the European Union today. We're also thinking that this is socio-legal analysis. You can't really talk about energy law without talking a bit about politics, economics, even aspects of sociology, a small bit of technology policy, or a touch of engineering. We're also thinking the theory is around energy justice. And why is theory very important? Well, the very simple reason is, for those of you not thinking about maybe, or let's say for some who are thinking about the theory of their Ph.D., or others who should be thinking about the theory of the PhD, but any practitioners, the reason theory is important, it's about replication of your science, of your scientific results, so that someone can come along in a few years and say, this person said this, I'm going to try and find out if it applies still today. Have we improved that system today? But unfortunately, what is law full of today is of legal opinions. And they are just that, opinions. And that's a distinction that I want to make, is that if I want a legal opinion and I'm working in the EU, I will go out and I will get a law firm to give me a legal opinion in 3 weeks. We are researchers trying to think about that change over the short to medium to longer term. We have a higher objective. Our objective is not to find a gap in the regulations so that international company X can pay less tax. Our objective is to think about that justice perspective and to try and deliver a more just world, to try and improve the situation for all stakeholders, so for government, for companies, but also for citizens. So we have trying to improve things for the collective rather than just one particular stakeholder group. So we're thinking about the EU specifically. You know, it is admittedly a complex problem to get all the EU countries to decide on anything. But, you know, that's why I say from an external perspective, other countries, other regions of the world are looking to the EU for examples. We also have a big market, so we do have a lot of economic power that, if used properly, could deliver a lot. So, you know, we come to this crossroads, just in case any of you are confused what crossroads are. But let's say the crossroads, we have to make a decision. The EU has been walking down this path probably for, you know, 7 or 8 years or even longer, essentially nearly since the third energy package, which was originally introduced, you know, maybe well over 10, 12 years at this stage. So what we need to think about is, where are we going next? What is the path forward? And I just put up that book. I don't know if any of you, some of you will know it. You may have been forced to read it when you were young. It's not, you know, terribly exciting book, but it's called Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and there's a related book called Bleak House. But one of the interesting things in these books are, and particularly when we were here in a coal region, if you read these books, they are about children who grew up in the early 1800s in the coal regions in the UK. And it's about the horrendous treatment, the pollution, you know, the economy. So, but the characters in the book, they have, let's say, great expectations. And I think when I ever turn up to Brussels, all I hear is the great expectations of the different parts of the EU. And I think other countries outside of the EU, they've been waiting for the EU to do something. They've been waiting for the EU, again, with great expectations. But nothing is really happening. So when we think of things from an institutional perspective, we're thinking, you know, going back to, you know, a small bit of method. And I'm just listing off some of these different institutions. And you can see the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They have different views on what it means, you know, the energy transition is and how justice should be part of that. But they are actually more aligned than many other institutions. We also have key, you know, systemic thinking or systematic thinking is missing between different parts of the EU, the way they talk about climate, the way they talk about sustainability, energy, and environment. There isn't a united approach. You know, they shouldn't all be so different. We can discuss the same justice principles across all those different topics. But if you turn up today at the EU, an environmental justice person is talking about something else, climate justice is talking about something else, and energy justice, we are talking about something else. But where is most of the climate change happening from? It is from the energy sector. It is from energy resources. Nearly 80% of carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions are from, as a result of energy-related activity. We also think of ACER, the European regulator. I think you would do well to find the word justice mentioned once on their website. And they're meant to be regulating the big energy companies. And they are telling the national energy regulators around Europe what to do. It's a very different message when you see what the banks are talking about, and then when you see what the different commissions within the EU are talking about. So, again, the European Courts of Justice, I challenge you to tell me one judge who has competence across competition, security, whether you think about it as energy or political security, investment procedures or investment rules, and pollution issues. It is a major gap, and that's why there are very, very few cases taken against energy companies and put before the ECJ. So we have this, very clear crossroads in the EU, and I just put up there, the voice of the EU is on energy, in terms of thinking about the energy transition, is slowly disappearing. So what we need to think about is, how is the EU being perceived globally or internationally? Remember, that's where a lot of investment comes from. It's where a lot of our, let's say, sales, services all make money from. So we rely on what happens, the perception of us externally to a huge degree. And this is, the issue today is because of that missing voice, there is a lack of investment in the energy sector and more broadly in energy-related areas. We have reduced innovation, and this is, let's say, we see today, or a couple of weeks ago, the Nobel Prize in Economics was given out to 3 academics around innovation and institutions, despite at least one of them being from the EU originally. His work on innovation and institutions hasn't been adopted, successfully by the EU. We've yet to see that happen, but also at a global stage, the EU is no longer the big player it was. People are going to other countries or regions for that investment when they originally went to the EU. And we've lost out on a lot of innovation within the EU. As such, we've become more reliant on trading partners from around the world because we don't have the innovation happening here. And that's why you end up with scandals where, German car manufacturing isn't able to perform. They're claiming subsidies. If I was a German citizen, I'd be saying, so we have to subsidize the German car industry because you failed to innovate for 30 or 40 years. All the executives who are working in that industry are sitting at home in large houses with £1 million pension pots. Meanwhile, their company failed to innovate. So what do we do? It goes back to that same solution. Who will pay? Why are we paying for international companies within the EU for their failure to move forward on the energy transition, their failure to move forward in terms of innovation? And this is why we need more leadership from the EU to push the energy transition forward, create a clear legal structure so investment can happen. And just one example, which I like to highlight from time to time, the EU thought they were being very successful in bringing out a Critical Minerals Act. 6 months later, the UN brought out a new document in critical minerals. You cannot find justice mentioned once in the EU Critical Minerals Act. So who is that written for? It's definitely not written for the citizens of the European Union. Whereas justice is mentioned very, very clearly. You can see equity and justice on the cover page of the UN document. So, I mean, the EU is showing itself we're already behind what international institutions are trying to achieve. So if you are looking for a safer investment as a person working in international finance, you will go outside of the EU because they are going to give you a safer investment, adopt UN rules, which will be overall in the medium or longer term safer than what happens in the EU. So then we look at what next. So we think of different agendas which are going to be changed very soon, and this is why the EU needs to move beyond the crossroads, because we need to reform at COP, which is going to happen in a few days in Brazil, or going to begin. They are going to start fully discussing what are the changes in the 2015 Paris Agreement. How are we going to reform the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda? How are we going to look at the just transition unto 2050? These are all going to be reformed over the next few years, and the EU, you can already see in their pre-COP statement they've been barely able to get agreement across the EU countries. And what we need to think about is, despite what the EU is doing all around the world, people are talking about these issues of justice. So I use, that a wave of justice is happening around the world. People are looking, how can we look at how we incorporate a justice perspective? That's partly led by the UN, which is insisting that countries, but also some companies, create what is a justice pathway until 2050. So they are encouraging stakeholders around the world to think about this and incorporate it in their plans. And the idea here is they're not meant to be spending, as in I've seen happen in Europe, where every time someone mentions justice, people say, okay, well, let's talk about the definition. And then they talk about the definition for the next 2 years and nothing has happened. So in other countries, in what's being promoted by the UN, you have a starting point. This is what we mean by justice today. It's a working definition and we move forward. We have to have certainty and provide legal certainty for different stakeholders so they can make those investments. And, in terms of thinking about one toolkit, I'd just promote this one being published in Nature Energy, and where we're doing follow-up work. And it's about thinking about what is the baseline today of what justice is. So if we take this region and we did an assessment and said, what is justice like today in 2025 across the different stakeholders, across the different institutions, and what will it look like in 5 or 10 years? And that way we can say who is contributing on the pathway to justice. So here is, part of the example in more detail. We're thinking, how do we share the balance between risk, reward, responsibility between the stakeholders? And you remember at the start of my talk I mentioned most of the reward today in the EU goes to the corporations. We want to see a rebalance of that within that perspective of justice. So when we think about establishing a baseline, what is the baseline today? We have an environmental baseline in terms of pollution standards. We think, how would that work in terms of justice? So I want to conclude and highlight that inaction stops economic growth and innovation. We are seeing that all across the EU today. We're also thinking that this is an institutional and principle-based approach. There are key energy justice principles. They can be applied more broadly in society too, but they are linked with institutions utilizing those in order to show how they are working towards justice and improving a baseline scenario. And then accountability and evidence. We need to progress and show how does justice evolve. What we don't need in the next 5 years is another 500 lawyers' opinions. We need to be putting this into a framework and highlighting how did we evolve it from a baseline to show how collectively did we bring the legal framework forward for these institutions in the next 4 to 5 years. So I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for very interesting and very important speeches for global perspective and regional perspective. Now, let's start small discussion. Who has a question for Professor? Professor?
Many thanks, Raphael. Really helpful presentation. My name is Eddie. We're a co-director for the Aberdeen University Centre for Energy Law, and it's great to be here. I think my question is, at different tipping points, it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 10 steps back, because different unpredictable factors are, to a very large extent, influencing or impacting this drive to energy justice. From your viewpoint, do you think the future is rather positive or bleak in terms of some of these interactions and interfaces?
So I would say that the future is more positive than bleak. So despite what's happening globally, and there's a key issue in terms of you identifying the issue of tipping points, we need to realize that, we want to move forward on a journey, and we will sometimes face different opposition. But you want to be able to show, if you follow a sort of transition and justice framework, you can actually show that the risk of action is reduced. And that has a positive aspect for each stakeholder. And the more stakeholders see that, the more they buy in to this energy transition and justice perspective. So when you have different problems, and I think sometimes, unfortunately today, some groups may get swayed into inaction. So like some of what you hear from some of the EU politicians is we need to respond and reposition ourselves because of what's happening in America. But then when he finishes his term in 2 years, because the last year of a US presidency, they're focusing on the next one. So the person isn't able to do much. So why are we changing the EU approach for a temporary 3-year president? The EU has to be a bit more ambitious and say, look, we have our own policies, we have our own agenda, we have our own geopolitical agenda, but operating to some of these very, very short-term issues is part of the problem. And I think that's where we should be using the institutional strength of the EU to create more medium or longer term objectives. And that's where we need to get to. But I believe that globally, despite what's happening in the EU, or the US. I think the rest of the world is progressing faster than the EU or the US today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. My name is Halima Hussein from the University of Po in France. And my question to you, Professor Heffron, is, you know, the EU is actually a pioneer in institutionalizing regulation, you know, continental-wide renewable energy packages, and yet all these years down the line, and we still have a problem with justice. You know, why? And yet everyone wants justice. Companies want fairer rules for competition, fairer rules for investments, and then people also want, you know, just prices. Why is it so difficult, and why are people so scared of justice?
You know, again, a very good question. And what I would say is, I don't think people are scared of justice. I think as I know there's mostly lawyers here, as a legal community, we have failed to show what justice is and what it means. And I'll give you two examples. One, if you look at the research on energy justice today, 95% is written by non-lawyers. So loads of people want to interact with energy justice, but we, lawyers, are not realizing they're taking over our field. They are winning EU grants on energy justice. It's not the lawyers, it's engineers and political science. I think there are some political science people here today, but they are winning the grants, not the lawyers. And I'll give you an example. It's slightly institutional related, because we need to remember, are we interacting with our institutions to tell them these are frameworks we need? And what we don't do as lawyers, we don't say, look, I spoke to you in 2020, in the year 2020, we highlighted these issues. What have you done in the last 5 years? Nothing. You know, we need to start holding the institutions to account and saying, you know, we invited you to a conference. What have you done? What have you tried to change? And what did you do? But on a second level, I mentioned the issue of judges. There was a judge in a case in the UK. The decision was overturned last year, but it was against this big £6 billion project in Nigeria, and it was run. The company was run by, I think, three or four men, a couple of people from, unfortunately, from my own country in Ireland. They had set up a company in the Caribbean, so they set up without attempt to pay tax, and they sued the Nigerian government in the UK for 9 billion. They didn't spend any money even on construction, or even, they didn't even have an environmental permit to go ahead with their project in Nigeria. What did the UK court say? They said, you know, this issue is not a public policy issue. You need to pay them the 9 billion. Imagine it was like a guaranteed investment. If you invest, even if the country pull out, you still get paid your 9 billion. You don't even have to turn, get the shovel and have a picture saying we've started the project, we'll still pay out. So the judges, as I had the slide up, our judiciary, they're not understanding the issues of the energy transition, of investment rules. You know, these are issues that we need to change in the different institutions. And that's why I say when we think of these frameworks, we need to think of a baseline of justice. How have they evolved? So when we see the EU publishing reports, and we see, in the last 5 years, how many reports from the EU institutions mention justice? Well, as I said, the regulator doesn't mention justice. They had the Critical Minerals Act, doesn't mention justice. So to me, the EU has lost its pioneer status. That's why other countries are looking around the world for other investment.
For the next. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. Now let's start. Now let's start small break, 5 minutes, because we must prepare next panel, plenary session. So 5 minutes break, but Professor, I invite to a family photo. Family photo, small family photo.